I think the ideal diet is a diet that's not very much like the American diet. What I recommend for all the families in my practice, fresh fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, pasta, a little tofu, olive oil in moderation, a lot of seasonings, very low in salt, just a really elegant, simple diet, plant-based protein, a lot of fiber, pretty low in fat. I began eating very differently in my last year in medical school. I worked at a large county hospital. I worked at a Veterans Administration hospital, and I saw a lot of very unhealthy old men. And I looked at them and I said, "You ended up this way and you ate that way. What's the opposite of the way that you eat?" And what I settled on, again, easily, was a diet that just doesn't look like the standard Western diet. A diet that's, I like a diet, I recommend a diet that's really high in fiber, high in plant-based protein, a lot of beans, skip the cheese, fruits, veggies, grains, and beans. I grew up in Wisconsin, and I watched people eating a diet that was very high in fat, a lot of cheese, a lot of beef. I watched a lot of people get overweight and unhealthy very quickly. And I watched my father get very unhealthy and die very young. And that changed the way that I eat, and it changed the advice that I give to people. We can change the way we eat if we teach ourselves and we teach our children to ignore the advertising, to ignore the pervasive influence of the people who peddle greasy foods. But it involves shifting. It involves leaving behind our belief structure. Firstly, that eating more is better. Eating more isn't better. Eating enough is the way to go. Children know that. Adults know it not as well as children do. And then just stay away from greasy foods. We can change the way we eat, and we can change our health, and we can change our children's health and our family's health. We just have to stop eating the standard American diet. All of the nutrients in animal-based diets, the protein in beef and the calcium in cheese and milk, are very much overrated. We really don't know how much protein we need. We do know that most American children and adults eat double or triple the amount of protein they really need, and it's not necessarily high quality protein. It's very fatty protein. We don't really know how much calcium children and adults need. We do know that in a country that has one of the highest dairy intakes in the world, we also have one of the highest incidences of osteoporosis. So we're not getting weak bones and fractures because of calcium deficiency. We're getting it because we have too much salt in our diets, too much protein, and we don't exercise enough. People want simple answers. They think that if you eat more cheese, you get more calcium and more protein. If you eat more cheese, you get more fat. As a matter of fact, we don't need to eat animal products to be healthy. Nobody is healthier because they eat cheese. Nobody is healthier because they eat beef. Eating animal products, eating animal protein, is one of the unhealthiest ways to eat. There's a very solid statistical correlation between eating beef and becoming obese, eating beef, developing intestinal cancer. This has been studied and published over and over again, and we ignore it. There's a statistical correlation between drinking whole cow's milk and obesity in childhood. Again, we know this and we ignore it. Being healthy doesn't just mean not being sick. It means being fit, eating in a way that makes you want to be active, feeling good about how you look, how your day goes. Health is not just the absence of illness. It's the presence of well-being. The state of the U.S. healthcare system can be exemplified just by looking at something like diabetes. There is a tremendous amount of money being spent right now to find the cure for diabetes, and much, much, much less money being spent to figure out how to prevent type 2 diabetes and even how to prevent the triggers to type 1 diabetes. All the money is going into treatment. All the money is going into finding a medication to cure and to treat. And what we should be doing is looking at how we can prevent diseases, not how we can treat them. The American medical system is set up so that the money rolls into the doctor's offices based on doing more, based on treating with medication, doing surgery, and so on. The economic incentive really isn't there to keep people healthy. The money comes into doctors' offices based on how much we treat, how much medication we prescribe, how many procedures we do, how much surgery we do. There's no economic incentive to teach people how to eat well, how to exercise more, how to get enough sleep to stay healthy. The financial incentive is in treating illnesses. The way to fix the American medical system is to inspire and pay doctors to keep people healthy. That's how we fix it. We allow doctors enough time and, again, inspire them to sit and talk with people about how to keep themselves away from illness, how to eat better, exercise more, get enough sleep, really simple things. Doctors have a strong influence just because we always have. And if our influence involves staying healthy, then we're going to fix the American medical system. Exercise changes everything. It changes your brain chemistry. It changes the way you digest and metabolize food. It changes the way you feel. I tell the patients in my practice, especially the fathers, that you need to get 2 hours of exercise a day, and they laugh at me. I tell them, get up early in the morning, take a hike, a walk, or a run, and then somehow in the day, go to the gym or work out. As people get into the 30s, 40s, and 50s, if you get 2 hours of exercise each day, you're going to be able to do a lot more with the other 22 hours than you would be with the 24 hours without exercise. And as far as children are concerned, everybody wants a magic answer. All the best dog trainers know that if you want a healthy, happy, well-behaved dog, exercise the dog an hour, 2 hours a day. If you want happy, healthy children, get them a couple of hours of exercise. It's not as easy as it used to be, where we used to be able to walk out our front door and we'd play kick the can or play tag after dinner. Now you have to work a little harder. You have to sign your kids up for soccer or basketball or ballet or karate. You have to make an effort to get the kids to a place where they can exercise. But it's really worth it. It makes them healthier and it makes them happier. And they do better in school if they exercise. Kids need to run. Adults need to run. We're all healthier when we run. I personally get up pretty early each morning and I spend about an hour hiking and running through hills. Later in the day, I go to the gym for about an hour. Thursday nights, Saturdays, and Sundays, I play soccer for 2 hours. I try to get about 15 hours of exercise a week. Try to get 20 some weeks. I don't always make it, but I make sure that I get a couple of hours of exercise every day. A lot of people come into my office and they're looking for a magic answer. Eat this and you'll be healthier. Take a pill and you'll be healthier. It involves lifestyle changes. I've had success treating kids with attention deficit disorder who were either on medication or scheduled to be on medication. Encourage the parents to change the way they eat. A dairy-free diet helps. A sugar-free diet helps. Get the kids a couple hours of exercise a day. And these kids either can come off their medication or not go on to their medication. I've done second opinion consultations for kids who are overweight. And again, the parents and maybe even the children were looking for some magical answer. And the answers that I gave them, if I phrased it well enough, influenced them strongly enough, involved just eating differently, exercising more, and I've had success with it. The success rate isn't always high because there's such a pervasive economic influence in America to eat more and to eat badly and to watch more television and to play more video games instead of going out and running and playing. But I've had a fair amount of success with kids, changing the way they eat and the way they exercise. Oh, my strongest influences in medicine are people like John McDougall, John Robbins, Michael Clapper, an incredibly intelligent nutritional educator. People who've taken a step away from again, the standard American way of doing things in medicine. Dean Ornish was one of the first doctors who said, look, we can reverse heart disease. These people are pretty inspiring because what they did was they took a risk. They had a pretty fair amount of opposition from their medical colleagues, and they stuck to their ideas and their ideals. Right now, I look to John McDougall most of all, I think. If we don't change our lifestyles, the way we eat, the way we exercise, decrease our stress levels, we're going to become a sicker nation, month by month, year by year. There are little blips. They report that there's less of a certain type of cancer this year than there was last year, or less heart disease this year. But overall, the trend is absolutely terrible. There are more overweight children and more overweight adults than there have ever been. There's more type 2 diabetes in young people than there's ever been. There are certain types of cancers that are on the rise, and nutritional illnesses are not decreasing, they're increasing. Healthcare is really expensive because we get paid more for heroic things. We get paid for doing heart transplants. We get paid for trying out brand new chemotherapeutic agents. We get paid for diagnosing infections and treating with new antibiotics. We don't get paid for prevention. We get paid for waiting for people to get sick and then treating them. And the cost of healthcare in America has risen, again, year by year by year, and it will keep going up if we insist on paying doctors who want to be heroes rather than being teachers.
People are designed to live on starch. And of course, that's something that really confuses a lot of folks. They think, typical person thinks that we're on a meat or dairy-centered diet. And of course, that's absolutely silly. And as people become more sophisticated, they say, well, we should be on a plant food-based diet. But that's not specific enough. The human being is designed as a starch eater. And that's the proper term, starch. And that's what people have to be focused on. Traditionally, think about it. People have lived on rice, like the Asians, or sweet potatoes like the people from New Guinea, or plain potatoes like the people in the Andes, Peru and Chile, corn for the Indians. It's been a starch-based diet. You need those calories. You have to have those high-calorie starches as the center of your meal plan. And then you add fruits and vegetables. In addition, people are tough. They can tolerate some rich foods, some delicacies. And so if folks want to have delicacies like eggs on Easter or turkey on Thanksgiving or candy on their birthday or Valentine's Day, I mean, the human body tolerates that, but that's not what supports good health. Well, my understanding of what people should eat is based on my early experiences as a doctor. I was a plantation doctor on the big island of Hawaii. I took care of people who worked on a sugar plantation. And these people had their origins in countries like Japan or the Philippines or China. And they learned a diet of rice and vegetables, and they brought it with them to Hawaii, and they continued the diet. And these were the first generation people. And they had kids, and they learned a little bit more about the American diet, and grandkids were fully Americanized in their eating. So I had a chance to observe these three generations of people. The first generation, living on rice primarily and vegetables, very little meat, no dairy, were always trim. They had no breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, no diabetes, no heart disease, active into their 80s and 90s. Their kids, who gave up some of this starch and vegetable eating, went into more of the animal products, more of the rich foods. They got a little fatter, a little sicker, and the grandkids were just as fat and just as sick as anybody that I had ever taken care of. So that was my introduction. That taught me that what I'd originally learned as an unhealthy diet, a diet without meat and dairy, was not true, because my healthiest people did not eat diets centered on meat and dairy. They ate diets centered on starch. And it also taught me that it wasn't inevitable that as you get older, you get fatter and sicker, because these people didn't. They maintained their good health and their activity into old age. It was because of their diet. I was raised in the Midwest, and the kind of diet that I ate was the typical American diet, maybe even a little worse than most people. My parents could afford to serve us all the eggs we wanted, all the white bread, all the steaks. I could drink a gallon of milk a day if I wanted, and I did. And we had, plenty of candy, a lot of junk around the house, and that was basically our diet because my parents didn't know any different. And so that's how I was raised. And of course, it was a difficult childhood. I suffered significantly because of that food. As a little kid, I was terribly constipated, had terrible stomach trouble. I lost my tonsils at age 7 because of all the dairy that I used to eat. In my teenage years, I had acne, pretty bad acne. I was quite lethargic, didn't have endurance, so didn't do well in sports. At 18, I went off to college and I continued all that rich eating at the dormitory, and I ended up with a major stroke, paralyzed the entire left side of my body, and it's still weak today, 40 years later. As a young adult, when I was, say, 22 years old, I was so fat, my mother called me fat. And at 25, I had major abdominal surgery because my stomach hurt so much and so often. Fortunately, about age 26, 27, I started changing my diet. And now today at 60, I'm healthier than I was at 18 or 22. Yeah, I think Americans really haven't been challenged to think about what they eat. I don't even think they even think about it. They've been taught a well-balanced diet. They hear all the commercials on TV advertising the meat and the dairy and the rich food. And the message is so well financed that it's rare that somebody has correct information. As a consequence, most people don't stand a chance. Even if they want it to be healthy, they don't stand a chance. Now, for those people who want to be healthy and are willing to make the change because the information that is counterproductive to good health is so prevalent, they don't stand a chance. And I think the only help is for those few people who do care, who just say to themselves, hey, I got a great life, I got a great family, I got a great job, I've got this fat belly and I'm sick. I want it fixed. Those people, you give them the information, they'll go for it. But I think the bulk of the population really doesn't feel motivated enough. They're not sick enough to make necessary changes, even though I would think they're sick enough. They don't think they're sick enough. And I think also the bulk of the population really doesn't think they have any real control over their future. They don't think food's important. They don't realize the profound impact that a dietary change will always have on them. And if they realize that, it would make a huge difference. But nobody's telling them. Industry's not telling them. Their doctors aren't telling them. The dietitians aren't telling them. Nobody's telling them. Well, people are fat because they eat like kings and queens. They eat like aristocrats of old. I mean, look at the art and the written history of the past, and what you see is obese people with gout in their feet. When you eat a diet that is full of rich foods, what happens is the body adapts to those rich foods, and part of the adaptation is it puts on a tremendous amount of body fat, and it gets sick. It gets terribly burdened. So it's just as simple as this, and this is one of the most important concepts for people to get. It's the composition of the diet. The most important thing that I teach people is their health and personal appearance depends upon the composition of the foods that are on their plate. If you have a diet like I had when I was a kid that was composed of lots of fats and sugars and refined foods and meats and dairy products and all kinds of junk, and that's what's going into the body, then you take on a certain characteristic appearance and health, bad health actually. It's because of the composition of the food. It doesn't matter to me whether you think good thoughts or bad thoughts, whether you're a nice person or a bad person, whether you go to church or not. It has to do with the kind of food that you put in your mouth. So if you're going to eat rich foods, you look like people who eat rich foods. Think about the fat kings and queens of old. If you're going to eat a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables and minimize the dairy and the meat, then you're going to look like people who eat that kind of diet. And there are billions of people that provide that example. I mean, you think about the people who live in Japan or Thailand or Cambodia or in Peru or in New Guinea. People who live on starch-based diets are always trim, young, active, and avoid the diseases that we have. It's the composition of the food. That's all you have to care about. The statistics are that 2/3 of people are overweight in Western countries, and maybe 1/3 are obese. And it's due to what they eat. it's really not due to lack of physical activity. I think that's secondary. Secondary in the fact that they don't feel well enough to exercise, and secondary in terms of its impact on health and personal appearance. We got to get the food right first. But I really don't think people will choose that on their own. I mean, they like rich foods. They like the fact that they can eat like the richest people that ever lived on this planet. They're really comfortable with these kinds of foods. So, except for a small percentage of the population who really do care about their health and personal appearance, the bulk of the population is not going to change on their own. So they're going to have to be forced to change, and this may occur due to changes in our economics. If we developed a worldwide depression, and that's all that was available was rice and potatoes and sweet potatoes and fruits and vegetables, the health in the world would change overnight, basically. Or if we had some forced rules that made people change. Like, for example, if insurance companies, like they do with smokers and alcoholics and drunk drivers, they say, hey, we're not going to insure you, or we're going to charge you a huge premium for your abusive behavior. Now, if that happened, and insurance companies made those kinds of rules, then people would pay attention. They'd change. It's money out of their pockets if they end up doing the wrong things. So insurance company says, okay, if you eat this rich Western diet and we can see it in your cholesterol and your blood pressure and your body weight, then you're going to be charged 3 times as much as somebody who doesn't. People will change. Or, it's possible that the government could decide that we need to make a big change in our country, in our population. I think that that's not unrealistic. If things got more desperate in this country, I think that there would be some government rules to change. I mean, after all, we live in a population of people that is so fat and so sick that we couldn't defend ourselves from an invading nation. It's unbelievable, the condition that we're in. We're basically defenseless because of our current health crisis. The human being is designed to live on starch with the addition of fruits and vegetables. And animal products do not add to better nutrition. I mean, that's basically the way to look at it. When I started putting together the McDougall diet, as a lot of people refer to it, about 30 years ago, I started with the premise, what would be the best diet for people to eat to be in good health and to look their best? And I came up with a starch-based diet. Rice, corn, potatoes, beans, a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. And then what I would do is I'd play these mental games. I'd say, well, what if I added dairy? Would that make an overall positive or negative impact? And the answer was it made a negative impact. Well, what if I added chicken or fish or beef? And it all came down to, well, I'd be adding things like calories and maybe some vitamins and minerals that may be in larger amounts. But the harm that I added by making that addition to the starch-based diet far outweighed any benefits. So the simple answer is that people not only do not need animal products to be healthy, if they consume them in significant amounts, they'll be sick, just like Westerners are. They're sick and fat. People are always telling me that they're going to be saved by their heredity, their good genetics. And they point out that grandma and grandpa, they live to be 85, 95 years old, eating bacon grease on their bread. And, that may be in part true. I mean, genetics are an important issue, but grandma and grandpa didn't live the same way that we do. I mean, pesticides and all these environmental chemicals only became an issue after World War II. And they ate out of their garden, and they worked hard all day long, and they spent time out in the sunshine, which is very important for good health. So it really isn't the same. And people, when they really look at the overall picture, they're not being saved by their genetics. And so I certainly wouldn't count on that. The issue of whether or not we should eat animals takes us along many different paths. The path I took was one as a doctor. I mean, I was interested in people's health. And what I saw is that people who relied upon animal flesh or animal byproducts like eggs and dairy products, they got fat and sick. And some of the reasons are identified easily by terms such as cholesterol and fat and lack of fiber and so on. But it's basically the wrong food for people is to eat animals. Now that's the original road that I took, but there are other issues too that have become even important to me, in fact, very important to me. There are issues such as the environment. And we're basically eating the earth to death by consuming all of this livestock, and this has got to change. And so I speak out vocally these days about the fact that you have to change your diet not only to save human health, but you have to change your diet to save the environment, and it's got to be done quickly. And then there's the issue of animal rights, which I can also sympathize with and give some very important credence to. So, yeah, it's wrong to eat animals, no matter how you look at it. I'm going to still emphasize the health issues and hope that inspires people. But to tell you the truth, I really think the change is going to come because people realize how much destruction they're doing to the planet by their behaviors. The U.S. healthcare system is a system based on profit. I mean, it's just out there to share a lot of money is basically what it is. If its intention was to really make people healthy, then it would be a very unprofitable system. As it is now, you got the commodity, which is sick, fat people, which everybody's getting fat off of, so to speak, economically. The doctors are getting rich, the drug companies are getting rich, the hospitals are getting rich, the insurance companies are getting rich off of all this sickness. After all, the bigger the business, the more money these insurance companies make. And so all the financial incentive is towards sickness. Now, we could change all that, and that would take some really strong manipulation of the rules. We could punish insurance companies and doctors for sickness. We could make it such a system where a doctor would be paid upon the patients being healthier. We almost had that. It was called capitation. It went by its way about 10 years ago, but under the capitated system, the doctor got a certain amount of money to spend on the patients. And what was left over, the doctor got to keep it. And so it was really to the doctor's advantage to keep the patients healthy. It never got around to that, but it could and it should. So if you change the financial incentives in our healthcare system so that good health, good function, and a good diet were the rewards, then we'd see a change in our health overnight. I have to say that what I've learned, what I've developed, what I present is not original in any way. I mean, I stand on the shoulders of many great people, and they go back as far as Daniel in the Bible, who practiced the McDougall 10-day program and reported it 2,005 or 3,500 years ago. There are some more recent people that have made a great influence on me, like Russell Henry Chittenden, who was the head of Yale's Department of Biochemistry for 30 years. He knew basically everything that I knew, that I know now, over 100 years ago. And there was Walter Kempner, who went to Duke University and taught the rice diet. He essentially published everything I talk about by 1953. Nathan Pritikin made it very popular, a near-vegetarian starch-based diet. Roy Swank, who was the head of neurology for 23 years at the University of Oregon Medical School, basically cured multiple sclerosis with the kind of diet that I teach. So there are many folks whose shoulders I stand on and who I rely upon to tell this message. And I love to tell their stories. Sometimes I get asked about what I've made as far as a contribution to what goes on here in terms of good health and knowledge about diet and medicine. And I have to say I've made very little original contribution, but I'll tell you what I did bring to the table that nobody else has done, and that's Mary. Mary, my wife, my partner for 35 years, is an absolute genius in the kitchen. She's a very humble person. She would never express this to you. But what she's done is taking something that in most people's minds is impractical and made it not only practical but enjoyable. In fact, the best meal plan that there is. None of my heroes, none of my mentors had a Mary. Walter Kempner didn't even have a wife. I don't know who Russell Henry Chittenden lived with, and I knew Roy Swank's at least two of his wives, and none of them brought the contribution to their practice that Mary has brought to mine. So I'd have to say when it goes down in history as far as where the difference in the McDougall diet lies, it's in the fact that I was very fortunate to end up with the right partner in life. I've been at this now for almost 35 years. And when I originally discovered the things that I discovered 35 years ago, I went to my chief of medicine. I was a resident in internal medicine. And I said that 80% of the problems that I treat are caused by diet, and most of them would be cured if we changed people's diet. And of course, he got upset with me. I thought it would be just a matter of months, if not years, that everybody else would discover this and the whole world would change. That was 35 years ago. I don't see things as any better for the bulk of the population. What I see is there are a certain group of people who have taken advantage of this information and made changes. It's just like with cigarette smoking. Intelligent people who have high levels of self-worth don't smoke. Who smokes are teenage girls and blue-collar workers. You know, it's the same thing with other abuses that people do in life, is that those who really get a bang on life, who really enjoy life, who want the most out of it, they pick up this good information about habits and diet, and they put it in their life, and it changes everything. So, you know, my realistic belief is that we're only going to get to a small segment of the population. And it is important that we get to these people. You know, I consider myself one of these people, and I think our audience is that kind of person. You want to have a better life, and so you want this information. But I really don't plan on all of the public understanding what to do and making changes. Just like, look at how many people smoke these days and abuse alcohol and don't wear their safety belts. There's always going to be the bulk of the people who just don't get it or don't care. I think the most important thing for people to understand is they have an opportunity, once they have information, they have an opportunity to have a much, much better life. And I think what you should do is you should worry about yourself and your family and your immediate friends. And you should share this message with everybody that you can share it with that you care about. And I think if each and every one of us did that, instead of worrying about the whole world, we just worried about those people we love around us and really made the effort to communicate and to help them change, that there are enough people that will learn this message that will change the whole world.
Certainly a healthiest diet is one that's very rich in high nutrient plant foods. And as you may know, I've been looking at this question for the last 20 years and actually spent a lot of time analyzing all the nutrient scores, or looking at exactly what is in food and what humans need to sustain not just good health, and not just to live, but to live with excellent health, to maintain our mental faculties late in life, to have the highest quality of life in our later years. And apparently, to get that type of food intake, we have to be a little careful in what we eat. We can't just eat anything that has calories in it. We actually have to seek out foods that are nutrient rich. And particularly, we have to eat lots of vegetables. Any society that we can look at the world over that had long life and a very healthy life expectancy in the most elderly members always had a diet rich in vegetables. Then to balance that out, after your diet is vegetable, one of the qualities of a healthy diet is to be vegetable rich. Other qualities are to get a diversity of micronutrients in their most natural state, so these micronutrients aren't lost in processing. I've really decided to go to medical school and become a physician, when I was many, many years ago. And in doing so, the reason I wanted to become a physician is because I saw something lacking, tremendously lacking among the medical profession, that we were looking at, or that doctors were looking for a medication, a treatment. It was a cure mentality, looking for a pill to try to solve what we now know are predominantly environmental and lifestyle and nutritional issues that are the common causes of most diseases that plague Americans. And I've dedicated my life to this. And over the last, let's say, 30 years, I've probably reviewed at least 30,000 medical journal studies on the relationship of nutrition to chronic diseases. And I've also probably read, every significant nutritional treatise or book written on the topic and published in the last 30 years. So I've made it my career to become an expert in these matters. And when you try to get a fair overview of the world's nutritional literature, it's not contradictory as people think. It's not that one study says one thing and the different study says something completely different. It really is, the preponderance of evidence is overwhelming overwhelming to realize that we don't have to have a population where 50% of us die of heart attacks and strokes. We don't have to have a population where 35% of the population dies of cancer. We don't have to have our elderly people having hip fractures and get demented and being in nursing homes, unable to function. We really have a unique and unprecedented opportunity in human history. What I'm saying is nutritional excellence enables people to achieve a much better health in their later years and to really free themselves from the medical tragedies that befall Americans. And I've come to that from not just my reading and my study, but then actually putting the conclusions into practice over the last 15 or 16 years. And putting it into practice, I've seen miraculously things happen consistently with patient after patient after patient. And things that warm your heart and say, well, this is unbelievable. I'm really on the right road, and this is a good career I've chosen for myself. I've had a unique or different experience in my upbringing. My father was very sick and overweight at a point in his life. He heard a man named Jack Duntrop speak on the radio in the early 1950s about a book Jack had written called You Don't Have to Be Sick. Jack himself had 2 heart attacks before the age of 50. And just so you're aware, I was playing Jack singles tennis when he was in his 90s still. Here's a guy with 2 heart attacks before the age of 50, changed his diet, lived into his 90s with no further disease like that. But in any case, my father improved his health considerably and became a little crazy when he recovered his health and his pains went away and he was able to live healthier. I used to think, he's going crazy, he's going nuts. Everybody in the world, thinks one way, and he thinks nutrition is such a big important role, But as I started reading in my teens, and I said, well, this stuff makes a lot of sense, and I started to get more enthused about it. And then I spent most of my childhood as a competitive figure skater. I was second in the United States in pairs figure skating in 1973. So you can imagine most of my childhood was spent in a skating rink. Skating, 3 to 7 hours a day, running, training, lifting weights, exercising, always trying to improve our strength and stamina. And I'm sure having good nutrition, we realized helped us and made a big impact. So I've had a lot of, and then of course, later after I retired from figure skating, I realized there was a tremendous affinity and interest and love I had for what I had learned and what my father eventually developed, through his doing actually created an interest in me that I pursued into becoming a career of it. And then I was working in my father's shoe business. My father had a chain of 9 shoe stores, and I had finished my skating career, graduated from college, and at that point I had wanted to go back to medical school, but I thought I was too old. I finished college. I hadn't taken the pre-med courses, and then I met my wife Lisa. And my wife Lisa was in pre-med at the time, taking pre-med courses and finishing up she had finished college and was pursuing a postgraduate program at Columbia. And she said, you're never too old. A lot of people do it. You can go back to medical school, when you finish college, even if you don't have the courses. They have these special programs, at Columbia, at U of P, where you can go back and take just the sciences and the advanced science courses. And if you do well in those, you can go back to medical school. And obviously, I did well in college, and I went to Columbia, took those courses, and my wife and I actually went there together right after we just got married. I remember we got married on September 12th, 25 years ago. And then on September 14th, we began Columbia together in the post-graduate pre-med program, and then after that went to medical school. It's true, we have the most overweight and obese population in the history of the human race. And the question is why? And I have my own unique answer. We know that Americans are eating too many calories. We know that Americans are eating a diet that's very low in nutrients, and that 50% of calories come from processed foods, sugar, oils, white flour, and a huge percent of the American diet are animal products like cheese and butter and meats and things, and we're eating a very small amount of fruits and vegetables. We know the American diet is no good. We know that people are eating too much, but the question is why? And I have a unique answer here, and I think that one of the reasons why, and one of the main reasons why people are so overweight in this country, is because when you eat a diet that's so unhealthy, you become a food addict. And it makes the body crave more calories just to feel well. And in my books and in my writings, I talk about this concept of toxic hunger. that when you don't meet your micronutrient needs, you feel very poorly when you stop eating for a few hours and your body stops digesting food. And you could feel shaky, weak, lightheaded, mentally confused. Overall, you feel ill, and you feel better if you eat food again. And so what I'm explaining to people is that only by eating a high-quality diet where all our macronutrient and micronutrient needs are met properly can we rid ourselves of these sensations of toxic hunger, or food cravings go away, and we can get back connected again with our instinctual hunger that is felt in the throat, is associated with salivating and food tasting better, and it stops us from being forced to overeat just to feel okay. So I'm saying that why we're overweight is a complicated issue with multiple reasons why: social reasons, economic reasons, political reasons why the government supports certain food industries and doesn't support and gives subsidies for other foods, and factors that of how food affect the human body and to create addictive drives and cravings. When you add corn syrup, when you add MSG, when you add a higher percentage of sugar, when you remove the fiber, when you remove the volume, when you don't have phytochemicals in your diet, a lot of these things play a role and interact. So the answer is very complicated, and it's a question I attempt to answer in a lot of my writings and work, so people have a good understanding, because understanding that question, the answer to that question, is critical. Without that understanding, people fail going on diets, because they follow a diet, they lose some weight temporarily, and then they gain it back again, because they didn't understand all these critical issues that determine overeating behavior, and it's an important thing to discuss. Just as the answer to the question why we're overweight is complicated, the answer to the question how we can solve this issue is complicated as well. I think that people need to be re-educated. You graduate from elementary school, high school, college, even professional school or medical school, and the most critical information people could have and should have learned to protect their precious health, they don't know anything about. They're ignorant about. I mean, where is this education that we have to educate people. We have to re-educate our corporate climate and create a corporate culture of protecting your health, not looking at reducing healthcare costs by managing medical expenditures better, but by actually instituting a way of establishing healthier people that don't require so much medical care. And we have to change this through our government. Our government has to stop subsidizing, grains and the dairy industry and the meat industry and flour products. It lowers the price of things like cheese, butter, and meat, and raises the price of fruits and vegetables, because we politically and economically, we subsidize some foods and don't subsidize others. And I'm not saying we should be subsidizing healthy foods. Just by removing the subsidies on the unhealthy foods, things will even out and the population will be eating much healthier, and that'll save a lot of the problem. So a lot of the problem comes from certain political things that were done through the power of the meat and dairy industry and foods and government policy in giving those industries a favorable economic status over other food industry. So I'm not saying that's the sole answer either. And really this is something that as the health of our population is going down the tubes, and as the obesity epidemic and the diabetes epidemic is reaching unprecedented proportions, I think people now are more willing to take a look and reconsider some of the mistakes we made in the past as a society, and these mistakes that are commonly being repeated in the modern world all over the world today, where we're seeing obesity develop like an epidemic that's spreading worldwide. Oh, I do lots of different types of exercise. I enjoy exercise. I mean, just this morning I went for a nice run. But yesterday morning I went to the gym and did some weightlifting and exercises on different equipment. But I love to snow ski. I like to water ski. I like to play tennis. I like to climb hills and mountains. I like to mountain bike. I like to swim. I like to snorkel. I love to take vacations and time off from work where what I do are fun activities that are physically fit type of exercise activities, and I love to do those things with my children. I play tennis with my daughter. I play soccer with my son in the backyard. I go, in other words, we go for bike rides together as a family. So I was raised as with a love of sports and fitness, and it stayed with me my whole life. And I find my children have the same love. They are always, if they can't exercise or can't do something, like one of my daughters is in like an off season from her competitive cheerleading. So while she's not doing that, she's going to the gym and she's running and she's doing something. My kids, they can't do nothing. They're into fitness just like I am. All of them are. The economic and social and political effects of the companies that have lots of power, like the drug industry and the dairy industry, have affected the laws in this country. Like, for example, where I live in New Jersey, you can't buy catastrophic insurance. Not available. You can't have a medical savings account, for example. In other words, there's no way you can pay less money for insurance there. You have to pay a lot of money for insurance. It's the only insurance available because obviously the industries control government to a degree, affect public policy. I would change things radically if I had that ability. I would make it so that people could get lower priced insurance if they chose to meet certain criteria for healthy living, if they didn't smoke, if they exercised regularly, if they ate a certain percentage of healthy foods, if they didn't eat unhealthy foods, if we could test their blood and determine they were living healthily and not partaking in dangerous behaviors. I would give them dramatic benefits. I would make it so it's very economically advantageous to live a healthy life. And I would make it very economically costly to smoke cigarettes or to eat hot dogs and pastrami and bologna. I think, and I would give people obviously enable them to have dramatic reductions in healthcare costs if they lived in a lifestyle that earned the statistics earned their if they lived in a manner so that we could show that their lifestyle deserved those reductions in costs.
The best diet is a plant-based, whole food, unrefined, unprocessed diet that's lower in fat, very low in saturated fat, very low in cholesterol, very high in fiber, and very nutrient dense. It has a low calorie density, a high nutrient density, and a high satiety. Basically, it's a diet that's focused on fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains, starchy vegetables, legumes. The reason I believe that has been a path of many, many years. It started back in around 1973 when I just started reading some books that interest me in nutrition and health. And I started realizing that perhaps a vegetarian-style diet might be better for me. Over the years, having much personal success with it and seeing the impact on those around me, in addition, I finally decided to go back to school to study that. So at the age of 35, I left my career in the food industry to go back to school to study nutrition, physiology, and health. And I did 2 undergraduate and 2 graduate degrees over the next 8 years or so. And I remember my professors one day, because in the beginning, it was clear that I had I was coming in at a different perspective than most students were coming into the nutrition programs. And they were very accommodating, and it was a wonderful experience. One of my professors in biochemistry had been a lifelong vegetarian, so it was very helpful. But at the end, I remember when I was presenting my thesis, my professor said to me, she says, "So, Jeffrey, after 8 years of studying nutrition, have we influenced you in any way from what you originally believed?" And I said, "Yes, you have. My opinion has been influenced by my time here at the university." And they got all smiley and they said, "Really, how so?" I said, "Because when I got here, I only thought I was right. Now I'm convinced I was right." So the research, if you really study the research, it really points to the diet that I'm referring to, a whole food, unrefined, plant-based diet. I don't know if I could find any evidence to show that is 100% true, but to show that it should be 90% or more, or a huge percentage of what somebody consumes, is overwhelming. There's just no denying it. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I grew up on Long Island. And what many people don't know about me, I've been a vegetarian since I was 15, but I grew up in a house. My father was a butcher, and his grandfather was a butcher. And so I actually spent some time in his meat processing plants growing up. And what originally changed my mind was some books I read back then, kind of the fallout of the 60s, the alternative movement, the counterculture. I got involved in meditation, yoga, and vegetarianism. So that was part of it. Also, I remember just distinctively one day working in my father's plant, and I was unloading these like 500 barrels of meat on a scale. And, I had the big metal hook, and I was unloading what had come in as a barrel of tongue, which is a popular Jewish food. And I was unloading them onto the scale to check the weight. And I just realized, I had one of those moments where I realized what I was doing. And I said to my dad, I said, Dad, why do they call this tongue? And he held it up in such a way, and he said, because look, it's a cow's tongue. And I realized I was holding in my hand this giant cow's tongue, and it just got me very uncomfortable, and I had to walk away from what I was doing. So that kind of led me towards vegetarianism, and what also pushed me a little further is when I would work with my dad one day, he used to go in very early in the morning, around 3, 4 o'clock in the morning to get all the meat production and food production done so we could get it to the stores in time before they opened. And, we'd get in around 3 or 4, and, I don't start to work till at least 6, so I would just nap in his office. I remember one day waking up early and just going through all the papers on his desk, and there was analysis reports from the U.S. government, and I started reading them. And they were analysis of samples we had said. And when I got to the bottom, I was just shocked at what I read. So because of things that were allowed in the food and that they had found in the food, of course, in less than legal limits. And so I went to my dad and I said, Dad, look at this paper. This says that this stuff is in the food. And he said, well, yes, that's the government analysis. They allow that in all processed food. There's just a legal limit you have to stay under. We get it tested all the time. And I was like, but Dad, how can we make food like this that has all this crap in it? I mean, this is just stuff people, parts of bugs and droppings and stuff. And he just looked at me and said, get back to work. Do you want to eat? And from that day forward, I just have always looked at processed food with I've just looked at processed food differently. And it has really opened my eyes to processed foods. And hence, when I do the class like on label reading or health food versus healthy food, and people say I have such a passion for it, how did that start? I say it started that day. It started the day I read the government analysis of what was legally allowed in food that most people didn't know about. So it's always been a passion of mine to help people understand what's really in food. Americans burn less calories per day. I believe it was in one of the Surgeon General's report on physical activity. He said that the average American burns about 500 calories less per day than he did, a couple hundred years ago, most of it due to modern conveniences. And he gave some examples that were kind of interesting, like for a family of 4 to do laundry, a woman to do laundry for a family of 4 a couple hundred years ago by hand cost like 1,500 calories of energy, where today to do it in a modern washing machine burns at most maybe 250 calories. Now, I thought he left out a very important number. He didn't say how many calories it burns when you drop it off at the dry cleaner, because you don't burn any calories. He also said the old push mowers, if you remember with the rotating blades, when you push them, you would burn about 500 calories an hour. He said power mowers today, you burn maybe 100 calories an hour. And again, I thought he left off an important number. He didn't say how many calories you burn when you're on a riding mower. Now, I actually did that study, and it turned out that people actually took in a calorie excess, because most of them who are on the power motor are usually drinking a beer or two, so they're usually taking in excess calories. So one side of the equation is we're less active. The other side of the equation is we eat more calories than ever before. Calorie consumption since 1970, based on production statistics, food availability, is up about 20 to 25%. So clearly we're moving less, we're eating more, we're getting much heavier. Plus the type of foods we're eating has changed dramatically. We're eating foods that are more processed, more refined, and more calorie dense than ever before. And a lot of people will say to me, but Jeff, I don't know why I've gained weight. I eat the same thing I've always eaten. What they don't realize is that's not true. The appearance to them is they're eating similar things. But I mean, here's one example. Just go to a movie theater. 30 years ago, maybe you've got, a 6-ounce Coke and a 12-ounce Coke and a 16-ounce Coke. Those were your 3 sizes. Not that Coke was your best choice, but those were the 3 sizes. And you got a very small bag of popcorn. The small size now in most movie theaters is 32 ounces. The medium could be 48. The large could be, 50 some odd. And of course, we have 64-ounce, drinks these days. The same thing has happened with everything. When you look at the size of cookies, donuts, portions, everything has gotten so much bigger. So people don't realize they're eating more. When I was growing up, if you got a little snack bag of maybe, let's say, pretzels, it was a ½ ounce. Today, bags of pretzels could be 2 ounces, 2.5 ounces, 3 ounces. So people say, well, I give my kids, a bag of pretzels. I say, no, you don't. It looks like a bag of pretzels. You give them 6 bags of pretzels. So food has gotten much more calorie dense. And plus, we've gotten away from just eating whole natural foods. When we look at the fiber content of the American diet, it's about 12 to 15 grams of fiber per day, which is extremely low. Basic recommendations are around 30 to 38, depending on age and gender. I believe it should be at least 35 to 50. Now, I bring that up because the only place you really find fiber is in natural, unprocessed, unrefined plant foods. Well, if we're not getting in fiber, then we know we're not eating lots of fruits and veggies and whole grains and starchy vegetables and beans. People may say they eat fruits and veggies, but the reality is for most people, fruit is nothing more than citrus fruit, most of it in the form of juice, most of it in the form of orange and grapefruit. And the same with vegetables. Some people, they count ketchup as a vegetable. They count French fries as a vegetable. Where's the real fruits and vegetables? People, and of course with all the crazy diet books that have gone on, people are afraid to eat things like corn and potatoes and grapes. They get heavy because they eat all this junk food, and then you ask them to eat a piece of fruit, and they go, my God, I can't eat a grape. Do you know how many calories are in that? And they've just gotten misinformation, which is the third thing that I would bring up. 1 is lack of activity, 2 is the changes in the food, and 3 is information. We're in the information age, and the amount of information available to us is just incredible. And the access is great now. Just to be able to go on the internet and to find information is incredible. But the flip side is there's also a lot of bad information and a lot of misinformation. So not only can you get access to good information, you also have ready access to bad information. And most people do not know how to filter the information between what is good and what is bad. And as I show in my health food talk or label reading talk, there's so much misinformation that's out there. And I really feel sorry for people who are trying to be healthy and lose weight and improve their diet, because as I show, there's so much marketing and advertising going on that just confuses people. They don't have a clue. We have a big problem. We have a big challenge in front of us. And the first thing we all have to do is to set a shining example. I mean, we can't go around and tell people to do things that we're not willing to do ourselves. So the first thing we have to do is embody the principles that we're teaching. That's number 1. The second is to start sharing good information in professional ways, and to help people understand the difference between marketing and advertising and good information. It's almost like we've lost the ability of critical thinking and analysis. I grew up, and when I saw a television commercial, my parents would ask me, what did I think of that? Do I really think it's true? And, we would discuss it. I think now people just buy everything hook, line, and sinker. So first we have to embody the principles. We have to start sharing the information, and we also have to start helping create healthy environments. I have to make sure my home is a safe place. I have to get involved. When my daughter was growing up in school, I always went into her classes and brought in healthy snacks. I always volunteered to do health demonstrations. I was amazed because I would do surveys with the kids, and I would ask them what their favorite foods were, and they would always tell me fruits and vegetables, and I would make smoothies and fruit dishes, and they would love them. So we have to become active. in our communities in any way we can, whether it's the PTA, the local college, the local adult education. We have to get involved in little community support groups. I've always found that a big help. You know, when I was in the Midwest for a while, people said, "Oh, you're not going to find support here." I said, "Of course I will. I'll just start it." So I just start little groups of health support groups, vegetarian potluck dinners. And before I knew it, there were 35, 40, 50 people coming to these groups because people want good information. So, you know, it's going to be a difficult thing, but we also have to get politicians involved. We have to get food companies involved. The CDC talked about it, and they said that it's going to take at least like a 10-fold approach, a 8 or 10-prong approach, which includes, you know, schools, communities, families, government. But, you know, there's communities that have done this. There's a very famous World Health Organization study called the North Karelia Project, where they went into a town called a district, North Karelia in Finland, that had very high disease rates. And they did what I'm talking about. They got everybody involved. They got the grocers, they got the produce people, they got the communities, they got the schools, they got public health, they got everybody involved on a community effort to improve things. The restaurants, everybody. And at the end of 25 years, I believe it is, they've published all the results. Lifespan for men and women both increased quite a few years. Disease and death rates for heart disease, other forms of cardiovascular disease, cancers, all drop significantly. So you really can change the community, and I think that's a great example of it. But what you have to do is get everybody on board. And what we have right now is we have a lot of this going on. You know, you talk to food people and they say, well, it's because people don't exercise enough. And then you talk to people about why there's no fitness in schools, and they go, well, the bottom line is kids eat too much. And everybody's pointing at somebody else. And we just have to stop, and we just have to say, listen, this is a mess we're in. We're all partly to blame. It doesn't matter who's the bottom line caused. We all have a role to play. And if we're going to fix this, we all have a role to play in fixing this. And we need to work together, stop doing this, do more of this, and let's work together to fix this. Because, you know, the New England Journal of Medicine said 2 years ago that today's children may be the first generation ever where the parents outlive their children, all because of the impact of obesity and its health-related consequences. So this is no longer my opinion or your opinion. This is a national public health crisis that we have to do something about, and we have to start acting. A great example is the Tarahumara Indians, who are well studied because of their great endurance habits. They live up in the Sierra Madre Mountains of Mexico. They eat virtually a plant-based diet. 89% of their food basically comes from rice, corn, and beans. Then there's some peppers and other plant foods, and less than 10%, sometimes just 1 or 2%, comes from animal products. And they've completely analyzed their diets, and these are great endurance athletes, and their diet exceeds all national recommendations for every nutrient there is. So it's easily possible to get every nutrient you need from a plant-based diet, with the sole exception of vitamin B12. And one of the things I love to do is to do an analysis of green leafy vegetables, which are one of the most nutrient dense, and just show the analysis of what's in 1,000 calories of green leafy vegetables. And my point isn't that you're going to eat 1,000 calories, but I just show the analysis to my classes without naming the food. I just say, here's the analysis of 1,000 calories of food. Look what's in it. And it supersedes all recommendations, national recommendations for every single nutrient. And so I said, can anybody guess what food it is? And of course, everybody wants to guess some superfood they hear about, like walnuts or soy or, you know, broccoli. And when I tell them it's just romaine lettuce, everybody is just shocked to see that. And it's not that I want you to eat 1,000 calories of romaine lettuce, but my point is, if you ate 1,000 calories of mixed variety of fruits and veggies and whole grains, you would be getting all these nutrients. Now, if I did that same analysis with 1,000 calories or 500 calories of meat or fish or chicken or dairy, Well, yes, you may get in all your protein, and you may get in all your zinc, and you may get in all your iron. And for men, you may be getting in too much iron, because too much iron for men may not be a good thing. But you're also getting in too much cholesterol, too much saturated fat, and you'll be missing most all of your other nutrients. So it's only nutrient dense in certain nutrients, which may not all be good for you, but it's missing all the other nutrients that you need. You know, phytochemicals are called phytochemicals because many of them are made in, most all of them are made in plants. And that's the original source of all these nutrients. Even omega-3s, the original source of omega-3s on planet Earth is green leafy vegetables. And humans have always gotten them either by eating green leafy vegetables or they ate animals that ate green leafy vegetables. But people today think it's fish. They all say, well, don't I have to eat fish to get omega-3s? And I say, well, how did the elephant get its omega-3s? You know, elephant don't eat salmon. Besides which, how did the salmon get its omega-3s? Because salmon don't eat other salmon, and what they don't realize is even fish get their omega-3s by eating seaweed and plankton and green leafy vegetables in the ocean. So, you know, it's, to me, when you analyze food scientifically and nutritionally, it seems that the less animal products in the diet, the more nutrient dense it is, and the easier it is to have a healthy diet. Exercise plays an important role because it maintains cardiovascular fitness. Exercise also helps maintain bone density and to help prevent osteoporosis. And exercise also helps improve quality of life. I mean, we want to be able to be fit, we want to have flexibility, we want to have balance, and we want to have a certain level of strength. So I could get down on the floor and play with my grandkids and pick them up, and also when I go to the grocery store, I can carry my groceries home. So there's a certain level of fitness and exercise that I need to have. And it doesn't really take a lot to get that. You could get cardiovascular fitness in as little as 20 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week. You could get enough exercise to maintain strength in as little as maybe 10 to 20 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week. And for general quality of life, maybe a total of 30 to 60 minutes a day. So personally, I think anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes a day is more than enough for anybody. But if you look at national recommendations, you know, they originally went from 30 minutes a day, then they went to 60 minutes a day, and now they're upwards of 90 minutes a day. 90 minutes a day in order to maintain and or lose weight. Well, the only reason they've had to increase the exercise guidelines so much is because people are eating so many more calories and they're trying to offset the extra calories we're all eating. So, you know, the better approach is to eat healthy and then do the required amount of exercise you do. Personally, I do about a half hour of very vigorous exercise every day, and about a half hour I walk outside on the beach. That's also where I get my vitamin D. So I do about 10 minutes a day of what we used to call calisthenics. Many of us remember them from school when we used to have PE, like jumping jacks and push-ups and sit-ups and all those. And it's a very vigorous routine. If anybody hasn't done them in a long time, you should try doing them. They may leave you winded. And then I usually do about 20 minutes of either resistance training or interval training, which is very intense aerobic exercise. And then the next 30 minutes, I'll go out doing a brisk walk, usually on the beach. I live right near the beach. So within an hour, I've pretty much covered everything every day. I've gotten outside. It's great for my mood also. I feel great, and I've gotten my vitamin D. I think that our diets are a representation and a reflection of who we are. To me, the food we eat is one of the strongest and most intimate ways we relate to the world around us and our environment. Diet is more than just food choices and whether we eat vegetables or not. Diet affects everything about us, our physical health, our emotional health, our spiritual health. You know, over the last 30 years, the relationship between diet and physical health has become now like a known. You know, where 30 years ago we were just learning about it. But now we're seeing the impact of diet on different mental health issues, depression, anxiety. We see the effect of diet on on how it impacts brain functioning, you know, and even brain-related diseases, Alzheimer's, and so diet is a very big part of much more than just being physically healthy. Also, One of the things that always affected me, as I mentioned back in 1973, when I first became vegetarian, I also started meditating. And for me, all of this has been interconnected from day one. Who I am is a reflection of who I am in the world and the way I behave in the world. So the way I see myself is reflected in my everyday choices. So one of the things that meditation has taught me over the years is to walk softly on this planet and to have a lot more compassion for all of those around me, and whether they're humans, animals, or anything. So I try to walk as softly as I can on this earth, do as little damage. I grew up as a camping and Boy Scouting and learning things, and one of the rules of the road when you went camping into the forest and national parks was to leave no footprints. And I think that's like a great motto for the way we, as far as doing anything harmful in this world, leave no harmful footprints, to do as little damage as we possibly can. And I think that's reflected in our choices. Clearly, we know the benefit of a plant-based diet on physical health, but the impact also on the environment is tremendous. So, we have a lot going on these days about how we can impact the environment with global warming, gas, the price of gasoline, automobiles, all this. Well, one of the greatest impacts on the environment is our food choices and the fossil fuels used to not only grow this food, but to transport it and to keep it and all that. So the simpler we live in this world, and the closer we live to a natural diet that's grown locally and fresh produce and all that, the less impact we have on the world around us. I think the U.S. healthcare system is a sham, and everybody's trying to fix it, and in reality, I'm not even sure there is a fix for it. It's so complicated, and there's so many problems at so many levels that I really don't even begin to know where to fix it. But I think that there is a solution that we all have in our hands right now that we could implement today, that no matter what happens in the healthcare system, we could do a certain part that's going to have a big impact. And that's to take personal responsibility for our health and stop looking towards the government or some system to keep us healthy. Because there isn't a system out there that can decide the choices of what I put in my mouth today, how active I am, whether I sit and practice meditation or not, whether I interact with my family, the intimacy I have with my friends around me. There isn't a system that can enforce that on me. And a lot of what we call healthcare and what we call prevention isn't prevention. We're being sold a big bill of goods. True prevention is not part of the healthcare system, because the healthcare system, like any other system, is a money-making system, and there's just no way to make money on true prevention. So what's called prevention now is really primary intervention. So, we wait till we diagnose you with something, and then we have all these, procedures we could do to try and lower your risk. We practice this once we have a diagnosis for you. And plus we have all these systems that are inherent, all these medical tests that we want to do so we can get to that early diagnosis. But where is the system in place to get it that we don't, so that when we test you, there is no diagnosis, that we keep you healthy? That doesn't exist. And maybe the reason is because it can exist, because that's within us. That's what we have to do. I'm solely responsible for the food I eat, the activity I engage in, and the way I interact with those around me. The problem, though, that I see is that we aren't getting that information out to enough people. So in my mind, a true healthcare system would be one that empowered people and gave them the information they needed to take care of themselves in a holistic way, meaning WHOL, holistic, the big picture, so we wouldn't have to rely on those. The healthcare system would then be an emergency medical care system for those emergencies that come out and those problems that can't be helped by, taking personal responsibility of our own health. My influences have changed over the years. When I first got involved in all of this, some of my biggest influences were Ram Dass, because of his influence on meditation, vegetarian, and spirituality. Because for me, from day one, that's what this always was about. It wasn't a diet. It wasn't an animal rights issue. The reason I did all of this, I always say, was a philosophical issue. It was just a whole way of looking at the world and being in the world. And Ram Dass at that time had a big impact, as did some of the raw food movement. I, for whatever reason, stumbled on some of their books. Then eventually that moved into like the natural hygiene, and Herbert Shelton, T.C. Fry, and all the great hygienic doctors who are still with us. That's where I ended up meeting Joel Fuhrman, Alan Goldhammer, all those doctors. And then also in the early 80s, as I started getting really serious about this, the work started coming out from Nathan Pritikin and John McDougall. And so those two had a big influence, and especially John McDougall. John McDougall had a big influence on my life because I was doing this from the alternative side. I didn't want to join the system. I wanted to beat the system. So I was doing things on the side as an alternative health practitioner. And what John did for me was he showed me that there was actually a lot of benefit from going into the system and trying to change it from within. So he was, for me, like the first doctor that I knew who actually went in and was making a giant impact. So eventually that led me to going back to school to get my undergraduate and graduate degrees in nutrition physiology so I could then go into the system and also try and make a big difference. And I have to tell you, that really changed everything. The doors just blew open when I got out of school. And I don't know if it was because I went through school and got the degrees or what happened, or it was just the timing of the universe. But because of that, the doors blew open and so many opportunities have happened. And so I've been able to interact and make a bigger impact than I was ever doing in the years before. And of course, one of the coup de grace of the whole thing was at the end of my schooling, I got to do an extended internship of my choice, of an area that interested me. So I chose to go spend it with John McDougall at his center out in California. So that was a big event for me. And so we've been he's had a big influence. Today now, it's, everybody out there who's doing this in a little way and impacting the world. Hopefully that, we're all, in our little ways, will be able to make a big impact. Today, a lot of the leaders impacted me as I was coming along. Now it seems the people who impact me the most are when I meet people, individuals in communities who are trying to get this message out and trying to support people in their communities and create the space and environment for these things to happen. Because to me today, those are the real leaders. Because like any big change, it's going to happen. If it's going to happen, it's going to really happen at a grassroots level, and that's where it's going to happen. So to me, they really influence me to see that that's happening.
In my opinion, the healthiest diet is pretty strictly a vegan diet. I have been everything, and definitely would never be a carnivore again. Vegetarian was pleasant, but I do feel that since I've been vegan, I have been healthier. And I must add that I've tried for the last 6 months to be gluten-free. Now, there's no ethical or moral component in that, but I have found it to be an amazingly healthy diet, and I've discussed it with a number of doctors, especially my wife, who's a medical doctor, and she's looked into it and decided that there are some real benefits to it, mainly because gluten is in so many processed foods. If you don't have the processed foods, then you don't have to worry. But it also takes me away from eating too much bread and so on. So a vegan diet seems to me possibly the healthiest diet on the planet. First of all, from my own experience, of course, and then from the experience of people around me. I'm just amazed when I look at somebody like John Robbins sent me a picture of him with a six-pack, and he's 60 years old and this smooth skin. He's strong, bench pressing 250. I'm only 200, but still, I'm 6 years older than him. But I felt that it is healthy. I watch people who do it, and I see that they look good, that they look healthy, that they feel better. And for me, of course, the most important part has been the ethical component. I just feel very strongly that no animal should have to die for my sake. And I just don't want any animal to die so that I can taste something that I enjoy. I'm willing to give up taste. And of course, as everyone vegan will acknowledge, after a while you don't miss the taste of meat. You don't miss the taste of dairy products or eggs, and you discover such a wide panoply, just an amazing variety of fruits and vegetables. There are many good reasons to be vegan that have nothing to do with animals, but for me, still the strongest argument is that I simply don't want animals to be slaughtered. And, I think it was Emerson long, long ago, he made this amazing statement. He said, "You have just dined. And no matter how far the distance, you are complicit in the original murder." And that struck me when I read it. I thought, my God, of course he's right, because it's so easy for us today to forget that we're eating meat. I mean, most people, when they eat meat, do you realize somebody took a survey? I mean, it's a little bit old now. I think it's about 10 or 15 years old, but it's still extraordinary. Asked Americans how many of them knew that what they were eating, the meat, came from a dead animal, and a high percentage, between 35 and 50, said they had no idea. Now, these may have been children. I'm trying to get the study because I'd like to see it. It's so fascinating to me. But obviously people, and today this is very true of children, if you ask a children, where does a chicken come from? It comes from Safeway. It comes from a market. And it comes wrapped in cellophane. And there's no way of determining that this was a living animal. For us, for too many people, meat is an abstraction. And I do believe that if we had to kill our own meat, the world would be at least 90%, if not much more. Somewhere between 90 and 99% vegetarian. There are always people willing to kill, but it's interesting that in every society, butchers are almost a class apart. It's as if the person does not want to be associated with the act of killing. I think almost everybody has a bad conscience about it. It was harder to do that than just about anything else I've done. On the other hand, once you do it, a lot of other things flow. You begin to ask yourself, it gives you a way of looking at the world that is new. So you can begin to question a lot of received wisdom. And that has always been very important to me, since I was once a psychoanalyst and I questioned the received wisdom of psychiatry. And I think it's easier to do that once you become a vegan, because you begin to see how often we're fed misinformation, and that you have to really think for yourself. You have to do research for yourself. You have to ask the hard questions. And you have to go beyond saying, well, I'm this way because that's the way I was raised. That's not good enough. And I'm always amazed when somebody says, I'm a very strict Catholic. And I say, why? Well, I was raised that way. Is that a good enough reason? I was raised a Jew. I didn't stay a Jew. I was also raised a Hindu. I didn't stay a Hindu. I was raised a Buddhist. I didn't stay a Buddhist. We have to find our own path. And the more energy we put into this, the more thinking goes into it, the more reading, the more open our minds are to information and to other opinions, the better. Then we can give informed consent. See, people are eating meat now without giving informed consent. They're not informed, so they're not really consenting. It's like a bad drug. I mean, I don't believe, since I don't like psychiatry, I don't believe in psychiatric drugs. I don't believe anybody should take Prozac or Haldol or any of the major tranquilizers. But at least if somebody's going to take it, they must be informed before they say, okay, I'll take it. And that means they have to have access to information that clearly the drug companies don't want you to have. And I feel the same way about eating meat. When we eat meat, it should be with informed consent. That means we have to know, how was that animal raised? And if somebody tells me, oh, he was very well raised, really, can you give me some of the details? At what age was it slaughtered? Really, how long would it ordinarily live? What did it eat? Did it have companions? Did it have a sexual life? Was it confined? And of course, the answer always is, none of these animals were ever allowed to live the life they were designed to live. And therefore, I can't give my consent. I see health now. I used to see health as the opposite of disease, and I don't do that any longer. I think of health as our natural state. I really do believe that if we were not interfered with, if our bodies were not poisoned with toxic substance, and that's food and the environment. If we lived in a pure environment, we would be healthy. So I feel that health is not, it's our natural condition. We were designed by evolution to be healthy. Look, if you look at a cat, I mean, I have 3 cats now. All 3 of them are remarkably healthy. They've been healthy since I got them at 8 weeks, and they're healthy now 6 years later. They never get sick. They're cats, and they're doing what cats should do. They're running around, they're climbing trees, they go for walks with me. They're not going to get sick because they are healthy, because they are living their natural life. If we were to lead a natural life, and that means a lot of activity, it means eating, for me it means eating only plant-based food, but for anybody 10,000 years ago, it meant eating mostly plant-based food. I mean, if you look at the diet, and especially now, new research is showing that, especially by women anthropologists, that the myth of the male hunter is just that, a myth. It was primarily that the reason they're called hunter-gatherers is because men were saying that the part of hunting is important, but the women recognized it was all gathering. At least 95% of the food that we ate in our evolutionary history was plant-based. Only a very small amount was meat. It was very difficult to kill these animals. You didn't do it often. It was dangerous. So we subsisted mostly on plants. And we did very well. It's true that we've improved the fact that children don't die at childbirth any longer. But if you discount that, hunter-gatherer society lived better lives than we do, healthier lives. They did not get ill as often as we do. They certainly didn't have any of the diseases that we're subjected to today because of the kinds of foods we eat and because of the movements that we don't make and because of the toxins around us. And that's one reason my wife, a medical doctor, a pediatrician, chose to live in New Zealand. She wanted to live somewhere where we could know that we were not going to be in that environment. We didn't want to live with 7 million cars around us. So we live on a beach with no cars. We built our house without any toxic substance. We have no rugs. We have no glues. We have nothing toxic whatever in our house. We eat only organic fruits and vegetables. She's very strict about this. And she says, for her, it's not a moral thing. It's purely medical. She said there is tons and tons of medical evidence that this is the best way to live, to stay healthy. And we're all healthy, all 4 of us. We cannot be so insular. You know, people have been fighting this problem and thinking about it deeply for the last at least 50 years. Where? All over Europe. I mean, if you look at the healthcare system in the Scandinavian countries, if you look at France, even England, I mean, they are far superior to our system. It's not that the medical learning is any better. It's not that the medical doctors are any better, but the system is better because so much of the incentive to earn huge amounts of money is taken away. So doctors there are more on a par with plumbers. In New Zealand, we have socialized medicine. I mean, I know that word is a bad word. They don't call it that, but that's basically what it is. Everybody is insured. Everybody has free health care. And what this means is doctors don't earn much more than plumbers. And that kind of egalitarianism is very good for medicine. And I think we have to come back to that eventually. So I think we need somebody with the vision to say, hey, they're doing it right in Europe. Let's send our key people over there. Let's learn from them and let's imitate them. Let's take on board a lot of what they do because they really do have it right in France. I mean, nobody waits in France. France seems to me, what I've seen of it, even superior to England, and Germany sort of in between. And the Scandinavian countries, I don't know that well, but everything I've read indicates that they're doing extremely well in those countries.
The best diet is the diet that makes you feel the best and gives you the most health, the longest years of health, and it permits you to fulfill your purpose for being on Earth. And as a rule, that's a plant-based diet. That's a diet that's low on the food chain, that's based on whole foods, lots of fresh fruits, lots of fresh vegetables, a wide variety of fresh vegetables, green ones, yellow ones, red ones, orange ones, all kinds of colors, and whole grains. It doesn't include things like high fructose corn syrup. It doesn't include things like hot dogs and hamburgers. It doesn't include things like milkshakes. It's interesting, it doesn't include a lot of things that are standard in the American diet. So the best diet in our society actually is one that's very different than the one that most people are eating. I am part of the Baskin-Robbins family. My dad and my uncle founded and owned and ran that company. And I saw the results of eating a lot of ice cream in my family. And they weren't healthy. They weren't happy. And that was one of the first things that's stimulated in me a desire to find a different way of eating and a different way of living that was more respectful of our bodies, more respectful of the earth and of the natural order and of our own natures. And I moved away very young. As soon as I got away from living at home, actually, I moved away from processed foods, adulterated foods, refined foods. I became a vegetarian. And it was an act of rebellion in some ways against the dominant cultural direction that's so meat-based and dairy-based. And what I found was I felt better. I felt lighter, I felt clearer, I felt cleaner, I felt freer. And I had a joy in my cells that I had never known before. And I think part of that was not eating the flesh and the products from animals whose lives had been nightmares of suffering, because that's what modern meat production is based on. We treat these animals as if they had no needs, no value, as if they were just commodities. And we frustrate all their instincts. I'm talking about agribusiness. I'm talking about modern meat. And then we eat these products from them as if it was the normal thing to do, when really there's misery on the menu when we do that. And I think that's one of the reasons I felt so much better when I stopped eating those foods, was because I wasn't eating the suffering that was embedded in the tissues, in the cells of these animals. What's wrong with eating animals is when we're not aware of the fact that a life was taken and a life was lived that led to that taking. And what kind of life was it? And the reason I bring that up, and the reason that I think that's very important, is that modern factory farming treats animals without any level of respect. In fact, with contempt for their needs, for their instincts, for their well-being on every level. And the degree of cruelty that's involved in modern meat production is so severe. You don't have to be a vegetarian, you don't have to be an animal rights activist to find it deplorable, to find it appalling, if you actually see what it is, how far it's gone, how grotesque. Because animals have muscles that enable them to move about, but their movement is so restricted, they are so confined, they are often kept in cages barely larger than their own bodies, unable to move at all for the duration of their lives. Now that makes economic sense to the industry, because an animal that is unable to move is unable to burn calories, and therefore the feed that goes into the animal is all converted into fat, which is then sold to the unsuspecting and unwary public. What's wrong is when we eat that without any understanding or any recognition that an animal not only gave its life, but endured almost unbelievable suffering and deprivation, so that we could have that tasty morsel that's full of fat we don't need, that's full of protein we don't need because we can get our protein elsewhere. And I think that the day that we start to ask where our food comes from and ask who's being affected and whose lives are involved and who's being oppressed or who's being harmed or who's being supported, and what are the economics and what are the ethics, that's the day that we start to take responsibility genuinely for the food that we're eating and the lives that we're living. I do a lot. I run. I happen to live in the hills outside of Santa Cruz, and there's trails that I run in with my son often. I run several miles every day, sometimes up to maybe 7 or 8 miles. I hike. I work out with weights sometimes. I swim. I love to climb mountains. I also love to dance. I love to dance. I think the people that have influenced me the most in my life are the people I've been closest to. My parents, influenced me a great deal, and in ways, not always in ways that I appreciated at the time. But what I appreciate is that they gave me something that I could choose to accept or not. My wife of 40 years, Deo, has influenced me enormously with her steady kindness and enormous amount of caring for me. My son, Ocean, has influenced me tremendously. He's such an inspiration to me. He's such a fine, caring, thoughtful, conscious, committed person that he brings out the best in me, always has. And I'm very grateful for that. I've had teachers and mentors. There are many lights in our world. There are many people who are bringing wisdom and truth and understanding and knowledge for us to share, and are rejoicing and grateful for the privilege of being that kind of a vessel. And I take help wherever I can get it. It's a scandal. It's a tragedy. It's an outrage that we don't provide basic care. We don't do very much in terms of public health. We don't do very much in terms of prevention. It's one of the things about our society that is most out of phase with our needs and our best potentials. It's actually a source of great pain to me and to everyone who's noticing how badly askew it is. And that includes, by the way, the doctors and the nurses and who are pressured and don't have time and to educate themselves or their patients or actually even be present in a human way. The degree to which profit and profit-seeking, profit motive has sucked the spirit out of healing and medicine and replaced it with something that's unworthy of us as human beings. It's one of the places, I mean, if I was a young person, I wouldn't want to be a doctor. I wouldn't want to be a nurse because the system is so outrageous. And what does that say? That you wouldn't want to go into a healing profession. It says something very sad. How would I fix our healthcare system? Well, I think, first of all, we have to take note of the tremendous role that food plays in our lives and our health. And we need to start subsidizing the healthy foods and taxing the ones that aren't. A simple example of that is to put a tax on white bread and use the revenue from that to subsidize whole wheat bread. Because right now, if you go into if you're living in an inner city, you go into a convenience store, it's all cigarettes and junk food. And there's nothing that you can eat. It's easier to find a Hershey bar than it is to find, or a pack of cigarettes than it is to find an apple or an orange. We need to start making healthy food, simple, basic foods, like whole wheat bread, like brown rice, like other whole grains, like fresh vegetables in particular, and the whole range of them, available and inexpensive for people. And let's fund that subsidies, by taxing the junk food. We all know what they are, and that'll make them less attractive to purchase because it'll raise their prices, and it'll make it more attractive to purchase the healthier foods because they'll be less expensive. And I think that is the right use of government, and I think it's the right use of our collective will.
When I went into medicine, I went into surgery, and that was that we were going to cut out disease. That's the way to deal with it. But I hadn't been at this more than about 10 years, then I began to get very disillusioned. I was chairman of our breast cancer task force, and yet no matter how many breast operations that I was doing for cancer, I wasn't doing one single thing for the next unsuspecting victim. And you can say the same thing about the intestinal surgeons who are operating on colon cancer, the same thing about the prostate surgeons who are the urologists who are operating on prostate cancer. And yet, just imagine how powerful it is when you begin to get unsettled with this and what you're doing, and you seek out and you start reading, as I did, the epidemiology of these diseases. in other nations. When I found out that breast cancer was 20 times less frequent in Kenya, and that in the rural Japan during the 1950s, it was very infrequent. But when Japanese women would migrate to the United States, by the second and third generation, they now had the same rate of breast cancer as their Caucasian counterpart. Well, how powerful is that? And if you looked at prostate cancer in 1958 in the entire nation of Japan, how many deaths, autopsy proven, from cancer of the prostate in the entire nation? 18. 18. Has there ever been a more mind-boggling epidemiologic figure? By 1978, 20 years later, they were up to 237 deaths. Nothing compared to the over 30,000 that we'll have this year. So you begin to see this, what unfolding is this very, very, very powerful display of the power of nutrition as you see the epidemiologic data. If you want to go the other way around, you look at the island of Micronesia or Nauru. A century ago, a population living healthily on their native Polynesian diet of vegetables and fruit and some grain. And along came the cowboys and discovered that they were lying on all this incredible island of phosphates from all the wonderful bird droppings that had been going on for hundreds of thousands of years. It was such a rich gold mine of this mineral that along came people who began shoveling away the island, and they were paid very handsomely. And the more they got paid, the more westernized they got, and they were having 5 meat dishes a day, and suddenly 1/3 of them were diabetic, and they were getting all kinds of heart disease. So literally, not only did we destroy the island by taking away all their bird dung, but we then gave them all this horrible disease. It was worse than the Europeans bringing syphilis to the Indians in the United States. So there are such powerful natural examples of this. Now, how did I make this transition? Well, when I began to see these tremendous and very profound and powerful epidemiologic differences, it was apparent to me that the only way that we were really going to turn this around was to show the power of nutrition. And I thought the greatest chance to do this was not with a malignancy, but the greatest chance to demonstrate this would be with the leading killer of men and women in Western civilization, which is cardiovascular disease. And the idea was that if we could have patients who were terribly ill with heart disease consume the same plant-based diet that we see in those nations where the disease is virtually non-existent and where they keep their cholesterol total less than 150 and their LDL under 80, that maybe we would have a chance to either arrest or possibly even reverse this disease. And that became such a driving passion with me that I turned it into that research that started back in 1985. Although I was born in New York City, we lived there till I was just about 7 years old. We then went to back up to the old Esselstyn family homestead, the farm, which has been on our family since 1675. One of the few in New York State that's had the same family for that long. And there we had cattle. It was originally a dairy farm, and then it was converted to an Aberdeen and Angus beef farm. So we always had lots of steaks and hamburgers, and that was what was supposed to make you big and strong, and we ate that way. And my dad sadly became sort of a living fossil of the ravages of the typical Western diet. First heart attack at 43, and then he developed adult onset diabetes in his 60s. And then in his late 60s, he had metastatic cancer of the prostate. And he died really of metastatic cancer of the prostate, but he had another heart attack that sort of, I think, was the final blow. But he he had between prostate cancer and between diabetes and cardiovascular disease. I mean, all of these are so characteristic, and I guess it probably, although I wasn't involved in nutrition when he was alive at all, it wasn't more than about maybe 4 or 5 years after he died that I began to get sort of fascinated with this. And that was sort of the background of the environment in which I grew up. My brother and my sister, we all ate the same diet. But it wasn't really until about 1984. I'd been thinking about this for 3 or 4 years. I'd read Pritikin's book. I actually read the first book, the John McDougall had back in '83, the McDougall Plan. And all of those factors plus my own background just sort of all came together and crystallized, and I just said, this is something I got to do. And so I know it's how strange it must be for a general surgeon to go into studies on nutrition, but it just has fascinated me, and that was the background. Well, my favorite passion right now is, how we change this U.S. health system. When you think about the fact that here are our great old U.S. corporations, General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, I mean, the backbone of a good old U.S. of A, crumbling to their knees because they cannot meet the health payments for their employees or their retirees. Well, how are we going to change that? Are we going to start arguing from which pot of money we do to try to get these workers at GM and Ford to get their bypasses paid for, to get their stents paid for, all their other health needs, or should we try to put the responsibility on them? First of all, on ourselves as a profession, to be creative enough to work with the union leadership, to work with management, to show these workers how to eliminate these health problems. Not pay for them, eliminate them. And there's got to be some sort of way that we can work synergistically, because the evidence is there. I mean, the information is there. We have to figure a way to be resourceful enough to convey that. Oh, I think my dad was, even though he was crumbling from these diseases, Dad was kind of a giant in terms of his ethics, his honesty, his behavior, his stick-to-itiveness. I think that I haven't talked much about it, but I did write a thing that you may or may have read. Maybe you did read it, on the Olympic reflections in my website, Jeff, and that was when you just don't quit. I mean, if it gets tough, then you just dig in and you pull a little harder. And a lot of that attitude that I think I rubbed off from my father. And I still remember, remember exactly the blue sweater that he was wearing at the time that he and I were out. By this time I was in practice. And it was a couple of years before he died. And he was commenting how he had been the chairman of the Physicians Committee for Medicare under Social Security. Because, as you may or may not recall, back then when Kennedy was doing this, the AMA, of course, was against it. But there were a group of doctors, and my dad was in that group, who said, this is nonsense. You don't ask people to take a means test before they can get medical care. We as a government have to have a responsibility for this. And so when this group of doctors got together, they said, well, we got to have a chairman. Well, they said, yeah, you're going to be the chairman. So we have this giant picture up at the farm where here is Dad and Ben Spock and Abe Ribicoff from Connecticut and others talking on the porch with Kennedy at the White House. It was really, really kind of fun. So my dad was certainly a key in that regard. And then, as I mentioned, certainly just the knowledge of what Pritikin did. And I mentioned I read and was influenced by, I think, John McDougall's first book, the the McDougall plan. And of course, Anne was very supportive when I got going and got started with this. I would be nowhere without Anne, and she's been an absolute angel in being an integral part of this. And also, I think once we got going in this and we began rubbing elbows with the kindred spirits. I mean, the fact that it helps me when McDougall succeeds, or when Furman succeeds, or when Ornish does. It helps all of us. Or when I'm kind of proud about the fact that our study is now out there at 20 years in the book, which makes it the longest of its type, and that we can sort of just throw it back at the cardiologists who say that these people, if they do start this, they won't stick with it. Well, they've only stuck with it for over 20 years. So who shapes your life? I think that's the best I can do to help you there. Of course, the kids were very supportive too. I shouldn't forget them, because our kids were pretty well grown when we got into this.
The diet that we're designed to eat is one that consists of plant foods. And what's really phenomenal about this is that the diet that's good for heart disease, that's good for preventing cancer, that's good for losing weight, that's good for treating diabetes, that's good for treating hypertension, that's good for preventing strokes, that's good for preventing gallstones and kidney stones, it's the same diet. It's a plant-based diet. And then the beauty of that is that diet is not only good for us, but it's also good for our planet, because it doesn't require us to, subvert entire ecosystems to grow grain that we turn around and feed to animals so that we can eat them. And then it's also good for the other creatures we share this planet with, because we don't have to kill them, just so that we can eat them. One of the things that you'll hear me talk about tomorrow is that it's just really, really affected me recently. It's just this looking at what's happening to the oceans and how we are absolutely emptying the oceans of major, magnificent species of animals like bluefin tuna and swordfish and so on, simply so that people can eat them. And to take an animal like a bluefin tuna that can swim 50 miles an hour and live 30 or 40 years and grow to be 1,500 pounds and, carve it up into sushi is such a heinous sin. I can't even find words to really characterize it. And, because this sort of rapaciousness that Western cultures seem to promote is being sort of disseminated worldwide, more and more countries are trying to get on that same bandwagon, and as a result, we're driving these wonderful, wonderful creatures towards extinction, and it's such an unholy tragedy. And I often think that, people feel like, well, I'm a human being, so I have the right to do this. Well, if some advanced civilization came from some galaxy, a couple hundred light years away, and clearly they would be more advanced than we were, and they would be, more intelligent than we are, because obviously they've been able to do intergalactic travel. Would that give them the right to eat us, to destroy us, simply because they like the way we tasted? Obviously not. And I don't think that gives us the right to do that to Earth's other creatures as well. Well, what's interesting about the way I grew up is the fact that both my parents were from the South. My dad's from Mississippi, my mom's from Texas. And so growing up, we had a very kind of traditional Southern American diet that was, based on meat on the table kind of thing. And in fact, I loved meat so much that when I was a kid, if we didn't have meat at a meal, I was depressed, I would cry. Didn't give me any meat, but it just really upset me. And we grew up eating everything. Although I'm happy to say, I'm very proud to say that in the second grade, I found out what chitlins were. I came home and asked my mother if it was true. She said yes. I never touched them again. But anyway, we grew up eating pork and the whole 9 yards. But again, when I became a teenager and I first read in the Bible that God designed me as a a vegetarian, and then I started to read about it. It became clear to me that this stuff was not healthy for me. And what was interesting was that I actually was living with my dad at the time. And when I came home and said I was going to be a vegetarian, I think he thought that it was sort of a phase I was going through. So he said to me, well, I'm not fixing anything different, so if you're going to eat differently, you're on your own. And that kind of, again, forced me to sort of learn how to cook and kind of fend for myself. But and for a long time, I survived on peanut butter and whole wheat sandwiches, but it was all right. But it was great. And what's really fantastic is that I recently, this past February, went back to Oakland to do a 3-day health seminar for the church I used to attend there. And my mom attended every single lecture I gave, and at the end of which she told me she was giving up eating meat. Well, my part is, one, to try and make sure that I am leading a healthy lifestyle and eating healthy food and, setting a good example. And that I'm not reticent about it. I believe in what I call militant vegetarianism, that, I don't sneak around at work and, eat in a corner and don't let anybody see what I'm eating. I mean, I'm upfront and out there about what I eat and why I'm eating it and why it's good for you. And I'm not, try not to be, obtrusive or obnoxious about it, but I want people to know why I do what I do and the reasons for it, so that they will understand, they can benefit from it themselves. If I go to a function, I'll take a dish, to share with people, to show them that, being a vegetarian is not granola and celery sticks. It's delicious food, it's healthy food, it's satisfying food. It's one thing if you are stuck in the top of the Andes and the question is starvation versus eating, a bunny rabbit. It's something else entirely when we have access to good, healthy food that we know is better for us than animal food, but we choose to go and kill animals just because we want to taste them. That's really perverse, and I don't think that you can do violence to either anyone or anything else without doing violence to yourself first. And one of the reasons that I think that it's so easy for people to eat animal foods is because they don't have to actually look that creature in the face and kill it, and they it comes to them in these sort of disembodied packages. One of the talks that I've talked to you about that I do is called Meat Eating and the Biology of Disgust. And in that lecture, what I talk about is the fact that the reason that we, skin animals and then cut and shape their body parts into these sort of smooth-edged, rounded little items is so that they won't resemble what they are, so that they no longer look like the animal that it came from, but that it actually sort of stimulates the area in our subconscious brain that is used to looking at plant foods. Because when you think about the plant foods that we eat, most of them are rounded, they're brightly colored, they're smooth-edged, they aren't bloody, they have a firm texture. And so we do all these things to animals to make them not seem like what they are, so that instead of being disgusted by what we would be trying to ingest, we instead find it attractive. On a number of different levels, it's wrong to kill animals because, one, you're taking their life for no reason, and to take an animal's life simply because you want to see how it tastes, to me, is the most perverse reason imaginable. It's only a cut above doing it just to see it die. And secondly, it's destroying another creature, and it's destroying the planet, and it's destroying your health for no good reason. In terms of my dietary change, it may sound odd, but the number one influence would be the Bible, because I mean, I not only do I believe in God, I know God, and so I believe what He says. And I know one thing that I wanted to talk about. I had mentioned that I use scriptures, quotes from the Bible, in my talks, and I do that for a couple reasons. One is because I think that the Bible's full of wisdom, and these are truthful statements. But I think it also tells us something about God, because the Bible was written, I think the last texts were written well over 2,000 years ago. Those that are part of the Old Testament were written, part of the Jewish Talmud was, or Torah, I should say, was, like 4,000 years, as old as 4,000 years ago, long as 4,000 years ago. And these people wrote things that we are just now finding scientific evidence for.
The scientific evidence is fairly clear that humans thrive on a plant-based diet that's relatively low in fat, high in fiber, avoids processed and refined foods, comprised of whole natural foods, lots of beans, rice, corn, potatoes, steamed vegetables, raw vegetable salads, fruit, minor amount of nuts and seeds as condiments to keep the fat content in the diet low. And that's the best diet for humans. Not only do we see populations that eat this type of diet suffering from far less degenerative disease than we suffer from here in the United States, but we see people who are ill reversing their illnesses when they adopt this type of dietary plan. Unlike a lot of people who find out about dietary excellence and optimal habits because they're ill, I found out a little bit different way. I'm really fortunate, and that was just through seeing some good articles about the impact of diet and lifestyle habits on health. And I've always thought I was a really lucky person. This is an example. The information that I got was good information. In other words, the first full book I ever read about nutrition was written by Dr. McDougall. So I got the right story about diet and health. And I knew my diet was terrible, so I decided that I was going to look into this for personal reasons to improve my health and my family's health, and then it became such a passion for me that it turned into a career. So I just found out quite by accident, actually. I grew up in the Midwest, and of course, it's the land of dairy farms and beef cattle, and people. In Columbus, Ohio, which is the home of fast food restaurants. I think more fast food chains have come out of Columbus, Ohio, than maybe any other city in the United States. And I grew up eating a fairly typical diet. I spent many years as a teenager dancing, and so I starved myself a little bit to be thin, and that was maybe more negative than some of my other dietary excesses that happened later on. But in any case, as I grew into adulthood, I lived on junk food. That was my diet: coffee, cookies, fast food. Didn't really pay any attention to what I put in my mouth. I was lucky that I didn't develop a weight problem. Maybe that would have gotten my attention. But eating a little junkier version of the standard American diet. And I always tell people I thought the two principal food groups were sugar and caffeine. I think we have to back up and start working on children in school, because that's where the problem starts. And we have this myth that kids are somehow going to outgrow their poor eating habits and outgrow their weight problems, and we know that that's absolutely not true. So I think we have to focus on two things in schools. One is the education that children get about health and nutrition, which is too often industry-sponsored and just plain inaccurate. And then we have to focus on what we're feeding these children in school. The idea of offering chicken nuggets and pizza in the cafeteria may be appealing to a 9-year-old, but it's certainly not the diet that they should be living on. So it's very, very important, I think, that we start to clean up the supply of junk food, which is readily available in almost every public and private school in the country. Well, I think there are a lot of issues about eating animals that we need to talk about. I think the first thing is the degree of animal consumption in the diet. If you look at it from strictly a health perspective, the reality is that most people on the planet who are optimally healthy are not vegans. For example, the Central Chinese eat some animal foods, but as a percentage of total calories, it's very, very small. So we're destroying our health by eating the amount of animal food that we're eating. We're destroying the environment by eating the amount of animal food that we're eating. The reality is that global warming, which I think everybody is concerned about, is as much caused by the farming of animals as it is the emissions from automobiles. We don't like to talk about that quite as much because it's, people get upset about that. The USDA is very powerful in our country in terms of recommending the consumption of agricultural products, including animal foods, but we're destroying our environment through this. And the way that animals are treated, I take serious issue with. These factory farms are abusive to animals, and I think if most people had the opportunity to really see what goes on in factory farms, they would not be willing to buy the products that come from them. And that's ultimately how we'll close those down, by the way, is just dry up the demand. If there's no demand, then the supply will go away. People can decide who they're going to be, and they can change their mind about that at any given point in time. I'm a good example. I used to be a garbage eater. I ate cookies and drank coffee all day long. And I made a decision not to do that when I was presented with information indicating that that was not a good idea and that there were much better choices available and that there were some pretty compelling reasons to change the way I was living my life. The reality is that what we eat affects many aspects of our personality and our quality of life. Diet affects depression or the lack thereof. It affects your energy levels. It affects your outlook on life. It affects your stress response. One thing I've noticed about myself is that due to my high level of activity and all of the things that I'm engaged in, I actually have more things to be stressed out about today than I did 15 years ago when I was eating cookies and drinking coffee all day. But my response to the stress today is significantly better because I'm well nourished and I'm calm and I can think clearly. I'm exercising, which reduces stress and all that sort of thing. So I think that who we are can change based on our decisions. We can change a lot of things about ourselves. And I think that adopting a program of dietary excellence can influence a lot of aspects of our personalities and the way that we respond to the world. I think the U.S. healthcare system needs a lot of help, in so many different ways. The first thing is that we are teaching people to pay attention to their health when they're ill instead of paying attention to their health when they're healthy. Our system of diagnostic testing, I think, promotes this whole idea. Diagnostic testing is a double-edged sword. Good idea to do sometimes. We get valuable information from it, but we focus a lot on it. And I think we lead people to have a false sense of security in a couple of different ways. First of all, because sometimes we give information about biomarkers that is just plain incorrect. Good example, people have their cholesterol levels tested and it comes back at 200, blood levels of 200. And their doctor tells them, well, you're in normal range. Well, you don't want to be normal in a country of sick people. That would be my first response. But the other thing is there's nothing protective about a cholesterol level of 200. If we look at populations on the planet where cardiovascular disease is virtually non-existent, we see cholesterol levels ranging from a low of 70 to a high of 170. In other words, their sickest people have lower cholesterol levels than our average person in this country. So, that person goes home from the doctor's office thinking everything is fine, and it's not. And then, of course, we have a whole population of people that have these diagnostic tests done and are told everything is normal. And they say to themselves, you know what, sitting on the couch and eating McDonald's working out pretty well for me, so I'll do it for another year, and then I'll get tested again, and I'll see if I'm still getting away with it. And it's that idea of telling people you pay attention to your health when we tell you you're sick, instead of saying, well, I'm healthy now, what can I do to make sure that I continue to be healthy for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years? So I think our approach to healthcare is really to teach people to deal with illness rather than teaching people to prize health. If I were in charge of the United States healthcare system, I think the first thing that I would do is I would change the perception that people have about the role of insurance in healthcare. This is a very important issue. We have developed a mentality here that insurance should pay for everything. And when I give lectures, I talk about the fact that if I turned in an insurance claim for everything that needed fixing at my house, my homeowner's insurance would be $14,000 a year. I mean, if the sidewalk's cracked and I expect the insurance company to pay for it, I need a new skylight, I want the insurance company to pay for it. Think about what my homeowners insurance would cost. But that's what we're doing to the healthcare system, to the insurance reimbursement system. So I think people should take responsibility for self-care and use insurance for catastrophic care, which means that we would have to teach everybody how to practice dietary excellence and optimal habits. And that should be taught in school. We should start at a very, very early age programming children to understand the importance of taking good care of themselves and what that really means. So those would be some important changes. I think the second thing, another thing that I would address, and I am addressing it, is we have to change the laws in the country, both at the federal and state level, as it pertains to who can give out information about health, and allowing more complementary and alternative practices and people who are alternatively trained to engage in healthcare professions, because we have a lot of people that aren't really very well trained about diet and lifestyle who are the principal deliverers of information about healthcare, and that creates major problems in our system. And I would change and I am working on this too, change the employer-sponsored healthcare system where employers would, of course, continue to pay for health insurance and that sort of thing, but they would take a more active role, since they are paying and helping to keep people healthy, and doing company-sponsored programs, mandated programs on company time that work on company health, employees' health. I was heavily influenced by the work of John McDougall. The articles written by Colin Campbell, it was before he had come out with the China study, but he had published numerous articles in scientific literature, which I had an opportunity to read. I read Dean Ornish's book. I read stuff that had been written by Dr. Neil Barnard, and I became really firmly entrenched in this idea that, first of all, there was a direct connection between diet and health, and the idea that there is absolutely an appropriate diet for humans, that this whole debate that's happening out there is just a lot of people sharing their opinions and telling stories, but if we look at the science, that it was very clear what diet humans should be consuming. So those were my early influences, and to that I've added, Dr. Goldhammer and Dr. Lyle and their work at True North, Dr. Esselstyn at Cleveland Clinic. I've had exposure to so many more people who have the right idea about this too.
I think oftentimes, we look at the increased rates of obesity, and there's this easy way that we can, blame the victim. Americans are fat. Americans are reaching these rates of obesity that have never been seen before, and it's their fault. And I do think that, there is this way in which we all need to take personal responsibility for our health. But, we've seen the corporations that are producing food have been vitally, or I should say that their primary concern has been the bottom line. And, whenever the bottom line is the primary concern when it comes to food, then we're going to have big problems. I mean, there's very little concern for public health that corporations have. And, we're producing these massive amounts of food, and we talk about it in Grub, this illusion of choice, where there are over 30,000 items in a grocery store, in a conventional grocery store, but most of the items in there are processed, packaged foods that are high in fat, bad fats, high in sugars, high in salts, and very low in many of the desirable nutrients that we have. And unfortunately, most Americans, that's what they think their choices are, and they don't understand that we're missing true choices of diverse, fresh, local produce that, we all need to have a more healthy lifestyle. So many Americans are confined to these choices in conventional grocery stores. They're being bombarded with ads, billions of dollars of ads that are being spent to convince people that these are the foods that people should eat. And I think that it's one thing to talk about the adult rates of obesity among adults, but I'm more concerned with the rates of obesity among young people. And I think that the problem that I see is that these corporations are marketing to children, and very manipulatively, very slyly, and oftentimes very surreptitiously. But, young people don't have the discerning faculties that many adults have. And I think that it's hard enough for an adult to, think about making healthy food choices when they're being told to buy this, eat this, consume that, when, they're the most unhealthy food products. But when they're young people who, don't have a lot of disposable income, who are badgering their parents to get these things that they're seeing on TV, and, they're eating these foods, and unfortunately they're eating in more copious amounts than we've ever seen. In my opinion, the answer is community-based interventions. While I do think that we need to hold corporate entities accountable. We need to keep one eye on them. We need to hold the government accountable and ensure that, there are true standards being created to create a healthy food system, to support some small farmers, to create a food pyramid that reflects not the concerns of corporate entities, but the true health needs of the citizens of this country. But I think more importantly, we need to have people living in communities, creating community-based solutions that bring healthy, local, organic, or sustainably grown produce into our communities. Because, there's one thing when we talk about the health factors or the importance of bringing healthy food to the community, but there's so many attendant issues that I think when you look at food, you address as well. And there are so many cutting-edge community-based organizations that are doing this work, and I think they're great models of the way in which we can not only bring healthy food into community, but we can stimulate local and regional economies. We can green communities and beautify local environments, reclaiming green space. We can create jobs for young people. So there's so many things that I think food can be a springboard for addressing. And for me, food is a human right that healthy, safe, affordable, culturally appropriate food is a human right that I think we all are afforded. And when we look at many communities that don't have access to this type of food, I think that we often see that there are a number of other issues or a number of other human rights that are being addressed. So, people talk about, healthy food being unavailable in low-income communities. And, I talk about it as being one indicator of a material deprivation in these communities, because usually when you don't have healthy food, you have failing infrastructure, high levels of illiteracy, low levels of income, dilapidated schools. So all these other human rights that I think people in these communities aren't being afforded. And I think food's a great way to have conversations about a number of these other issues and address them using this kind of basic primal need that we all have to look at these other things. That in many low-income communities, you can often find an automatic weapon quicker than fresh fruits and vegetables. And I think that's a great metaphor for thinking about the way in which there are so many food deserts across the nation, and there are these low-income communities that are devoid of healthy, fresh food. And we're not even talking about local, organic, or sustainably raised food. We're talking about just fresh fruits and vegetables, and many of the same chain grocery stores that you'll see in these low-income communities, and you move into an affluent community and see the same store, and they have just like a diverse range of fresh fruits and vegetables. So there's this way in which there's this kind of quasi-apartheid in the food system that really needs to be addressed, and I think that the way it needs to be addressed is by people living in local communities driving and owning projects that address food insecurity needs, and going beyond and talking about this whole term food justice. What food justice does, it goes beyond direct service and advocacy and calls for locally driven, locally owned responses by people living in communities, because I've seen so many well-meaning projects fall flat on their face because they don't have buy-in from people living in the communities, and they don't have the people who are the denizens of these different food deserts being in charge of thinking of ways to create access for food in these places. And they know the language, they know the culture, they know the mores of the community, and I think that's how it needs to happen.
Greed is the cause. Greed, if unchecked, just expands, and we expand. At a certain point, we're going to meet the limits to that. We won't be able to just eat and eat. How can we change what's going on? I would say the quick answer is to wake up. America seems, the Americans, and me as an American, it's very easy to get into this dream of there's plenty and it's peaceful, and there's no consequences. TV teaches us there's no consequences. There's always a commercial break, and the body falls, and then you go to a commercial. There's never blood, there's never ambulances, there's never funerals. And so there's just this kind of sense of ongoing fantasy that we keep. There's always enough, there's always more. And when we come to the limits of that, as Europe did, as China did thousands of years ago, as India has done, you wake up or you perish. And there's no guarantee that we will wake up and just keep this kind of addict stream of superabundance for me and for mine. Mind you, if my abundance causes them to be insufficient, well, you know, pass the gravy, pass the Big Mac. I'm always working to wake up more and more to the notion of abundance for all, not just for me. Beyond sufficiency. Sufficiency, still you struggle for that, but if there's abundance, and we do have plenty, the earth can feed the people here, but we have to wake up to the fact that I'm not in the center. So selfishness and self-benefit is really is the fault at root. And it requires me to open my eyes and see how it really is, which is how it's that everybody is related, everybody wants the same things, and I'm not really happy if they're suffering.